What is up everyone, Talon here and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Perun clickers, the newest addition to their lineup, and we're going to get right into it. Perun is a very well-known aftermarket part manufacturer, specifically when it comes to electronic components for your airsoft replica. They are most well known for making MOSFET systems that are going to work in allowing your airsoft replica to use higher voltage of batteries, as well as to give you aftermarket options such as active braking, pre-cocking, as well as overall voltage protection to your system, as well as a few other programmable things. But we don't have the entire list of options available to their MOSFETs because that is not the focus of today's video. Today we're going to be looking at the newest addition to the Perun family, and that is going to be the clickers. The clicker is going to be an aftermarket trigger that you can install into your airsoft replica that is going to allow a more tactile feel when it comes to your firing system. Most airsoft triggers are going to be utilizing either a small micro switch or most commonly copper contacts, sometimes gold contacts, that are going to complete the circuit in order to get your system to fire. The clickers are going to be a completely different system. Perun also very famously utilizing magnets, so all of the guys that are watching all of the AMP lives, put the magnet emojis down in the comment section below. I'm relying on you guys. We're talking about magnets today. Perun is going to utilize magnets in their MOSFET systems inside of your replica in order to identify what selector mode you are in, as well as when your system is going to fire, which is extremely unique and completely different from a lot of other airsoft MOSFET manufacturers. Overall, from what we have seen with the current lineup of clickers, as well as in the testing with what we have in front of us, this is a more reliable and a lot more consistent of a firing system compared to maybe more traditional systems that are going to rely on optical sensors to recognize when the system is firing or when what selector mode you are currently in. It also is going to lead to that more tactile feel, the break that you're going to get from an actual firearm trigger. What they are allowing airsofters to do is bridge that gap between the airsoft hobby as well as get more into the immersive real sim that a lot of people want to get into, and it's becoming a very cool culmination, and I'm really excited to show this off to you guys. One of the very first ones we're going to look at is going to be the Clicker V2 Speeder. Now when I talk about the V series, I am going to refer to the gearbox versions, so it's not going to be like the second version of the Speeder clicker. No, this is actually the first Speeder, and it is designed for a lot of the more indoors CQB or speedsoft oriented guys that want to utilize that quicker tactile action when it comes to firing your system. What this is going to do is it's going to replace your trigger contacts in the very front lower portion of your gearbox. In the case of the clicker, you don't have a lot of control as far as pre-travel, over travel. You do have some control over that, but it's not nearly as thorough, as in depth as maybe the V3 clicker or the V2 clicker Pro, which we are going to get to in a minute. But right now we're talking about the speeder. We have this put into this G&G low receiver or build in combination with the V2 hybrid. Now what's unique about the clicker series is that they are going to work in tandem with either the hybrid MOSFET systems or Perun's to be released HPA trigger board, which we currently have in these two models right here. Now, I did want to talk about that and wanted to be transparent that we do have that as an option, and Perun is going to come out with those, and we will be doing a video in the future about the trigger board, but that is not going to be the focus on today's video. Now, the V2 Speeder in particular is going to be, I think, one of the easiest for a lot of people to work on. Now, like I said, we do have this in a G&G body that we have here. We do have the V2 hybrid installed, so this is a battery-powered system. So, what you can probably hear is that it is a very addictive clicking system, and that is going to be Not so much a micro switch. A lot of people are going to confuse this with a micro switch because in most common terms, that is going to be what gives you that quick little pop, that short length of travel, as well as pushes and produces some resistance against the trigger. So it's a very easy system for a lot of indoor players with shorter builds in order to not exactly fan the trigger, but identify where that wall is and find where that faster trigger response is going to be. Instead of maybe a lot more US-based players that can get away with doing the finger in the trigger guard. Not a huge fan of that personally. I'd rather have a little bit more control, but I get it. A lot more players overseas, I think, are going to do the full hand grip, and this is going to be something that a lot of those players are going to find very, very, very successful. In the case of the speeder, you have 4 points of control as far as adjustment on the clicker itself. You have your overall spring pull, you have your pre-travel, you have your over travel, and then you have your return spring force. Those are going to be relatively easy to mess with. Your spring force, or your trigger pull, is going to be the amount of resistance that the trigger has as you pull it. In the case of the speeder, you can set that to be next to nothing. We did have to do a little bit of adjustment both inside and outside of the gearbox in order to get it as fine as we want. The pre-travel is the amount of length that the trigger takes up before it engages with that micro switch. In our case, we set that to be pretty short because we did intend this to go into an indoor-based rifle. You have your over travel, which is how long of travel your trigger has as it engages where that pull is, which again we set very short, so it's very easy to find where that wall is. Really, there is no wall because it's set up to be right at the wall. So you pull the trigger, shot, and then just a little bit of force off, and your trigger springs back to the first position. So it's very easy to go from point A to point B, and that is really all it takes to engage that gearbox on the inside here that we have set up. Very easy to install as long as you are familiar with installing gearboxes, getting them tuned and adjusted for that very specific build. I will make mention as well that in the case of the speeder, we did set the trigger pull, pre-travel, over travel, as well as the return spring force to what we thought would be appropriate, kind of adjusting it on the fly, closing the gearbox up, testing it. It wasn't until we got everything all completely together and we actually had it into a lower receiver and we were making those like final adjustments, figuring out where our actual grip is before we needed to take it back apart, make some additional adjustments because our first adjustments were correct. It took us all the way to install it to realize that we needed a little bit more, and then we got that figured out. So in the case of the speeder, it will take a little bit of additional time, which I know is going to complicate things if you guys are going to do AEG installs, like what we did on this guy. So just forewarning, be prepared to take your gearbox apart maybe multiple times over. The next one that we have is going to be the one that I personally like the most. Even though this one is my rifle, I did like how this one turned out the best. We are utilizing an ENL body that we used for the V3 clicker, V3 referring to the version 3 gearbox that we have this currently installed into, and we are currently using the Perun HPA trigger board. We currently have an N7 FCU installed on the inside of here, which does give us phenomenal results. And this has actually been something that I think is going to work really, really, really well for a lot of the milsim players. Now, the V3 clicker by itself, I want to quick give it a little, almost a little clicker ASMR, I think is going to be some of the better systems when it comes to players that are going to play with this at milsims. The clickers, because they are more reliant upon the magnet system in order to produce the trigger shot, and the fact that we have an N7 here, I think is going to give us the most weather resistant and the most hardy combination that we can get or produce for something that's going to work reliably and consistency in very inclement weather conditions. And I'm looking specifically at Milsim West specifically because historically, They play around in the rain the most often, and it's kind of a running joke when it comes to the Milsim West players. So this is something that I full on want to do a lot more in-depth testing, really run it through the paces and get it to work really, really, really well. But enough about that. Let's dive into what actually the V3 clicker is supposed to do. So the V3 clicker is not too different compared to the speeder. It is an aftermarket drop-in system that works in combination with Perun's HPA trigger board. What this allows you to do is similar thing. It does allow you to adjust the amount of spring force or trigger pull force, your pre-travel, your over-travel, as well as the spring force retention. You technically have a additional adjustment that you can make, which is the amount of force on the break of the trigger. Now, I do want to mention really quickly that when we were installing this and we were going through the testing of making those adjustments, having learned make those adjustments as you install the gearbox into the lower receiver, we did run into an issue where the magnets that we have installed inside of this clicker to produce a harder click or a harder trigger pull did run into the steel body of the ENL, and it did mess with the magnets that we had installed on there, which helped give us a harder trigger pull. So we did have to remove one of the magnets, make that trigger pull a little softer, or at least the brake a little bit softer, but we could reliably run it since we removed that magnet and added a little bit of 3D printed shim that we have glued to the topmost magnet. So it prevents the magnets on the clicker from sticking to the body and still gives us a very solid click. So what's unique is that in the case of the speeder, we had it set right to the wall. This one has a little bit of pre-travel, as much as I could get before we hit the wall, brakes, and then we do have a little bit of over travel, not as much as I could max out before we get a release, and then we can either work on the wall, getting a very fast trigger response, or we can let the trigger go all the way forward and kind of reset the trigger as a whole, which is a very more realistic function of how the real firearm triggers are supposed to actuate and work, which is, I think, bridging the gap between your airsoft replica and what you might be using within the real world, especially for my Milsim players. Now, in the case of the Milsim aspect, it wasn't just the V3 gearbox, but we also have something for the V2 gearbox as well. Now, this is going to be the V2 Clicker Pro. So the V2 Clicker Pro is designed to be a step up as in comparison to the speeder. So the speeder is going to be more designed for indoor CQB. The Clicker Pro is going to be more designed for the Milsim player, which does allow for 5 total adjustments to your trigger, which does allow you to tune it to be more like and akin to a real firearm trigger. Again, it is taking the place of the trigger contacts in the very front of the gearbox. We do have an F2 in this one, utilizing the Perun trigger board, which works in tandem with the Clicker Pro. So that has been very exciting to mess with and to get working really, really well. This one in particular, I did set up to be a little bit more realistic as far as that length of pre-travel before we hit that wall, set the wall to be as heavy as possible, and then set the over travel with a little bit length. Not nearly as much length compared to maybe a more realistic trigger that I have access to, but it is still relatively long compared to how you can set this. The Clicker V3 as well as the Clicker V2 Pro, you can set to be a very short length of travel. You can set that pre-travel to be very, very, very short. You can make them almost synonymous with the speeder clicker that we have on the inside of here. But because these are designed to be more Milsim in aspect, I did want to give them that heavier brake, a little bit of pre-travel as well as over travel. In the case of both the V3 clicker as well as the V2 Clicker Pro, both are going to work in tandem with their respective safeties. The V2 clicker is designed to work in tandem with the V2 hybrid, which is going to have its own optical safety. So it's reliant more on the MOSFET to recognize where the selector positions are, and so you set where the safety is. The V2 Clicker Pro as well as the V3 have mechanical safeties. So as long as you have that selector put into the safety mode, it does prevent you from firing or hitting that click system, more of that true to nature mechanical safety. I will say between all three models, these probably have some of the widest range of aftermarket compatibility as far as what they can drop into. Very little modification on the list of gearboxes that have to be modified or have to be adjusted to fit these guys. So that has been phenomenal to look at what you can put these into. And that is something that has been a heavy point of consideration when it comes to Perun to make these as accessible as possible. So I've gone over the broad strokes of the clickers and what we have them installed into. So we do have a wide selection of what these are designed to be for, as well as how you could apply them into your different play styles. I will say in installing each one of these, each one does have its own little quirks that I have gone over. The speeder having that weird, you do need to install it completely into the system, into the gearbox, before you can identify if the settings that you have as far as the pre-travel, over-travel, or spring tension are to your liking, because we thought that it was good, installed it, realized that it wasn't good, and then we need to take it back apart and then reset it. I will also note that if you are looking to incorporate the V2 Clicker Pro or the V3 Clicker in combination with a hybrid as an AEG, be extra careful when you go to do your shim job. Incorporate the clicker. You might assume that you probably don't have to. I was taught on the premise of have nothing into your gearbox to interfere with your shimming process. I have learned that you probably actually should install your clicker because the width of the clicker is going to be a little bit wider compared to the gearbox itself. So when you cram it all together, there is going to be a little bit of space by your sector and spur gear specifically, which is going to create a misalignment to your shim job. So be very careful of that. The V3 clicker, we did run into that issue where the magnets were intersecting with the steel body. If you are utilizing a V3 body with a polymer body, that should not be an issue whatsoever. But if you are running a steel body like this guy, you probably will need to be careful how you have that set up. You might have to compensate by going with one less magnet and applying that anti-magnetic non-ferrous material so that they don't stick to each other. In the case of the V2 Pro, this was actually the first one that I installed and was probably the easiest overall to install. Not a whole lot had to be done. It was really interesting looking at how the trigger board worked in tandem with the clicker and the engine that I currently have inside of here. That was really, really, really cool to look at. Also with all the points of adjustment, it was pretty easy to identify that tactile feel, where I wanted the brake, where I wanted that pre-travel. And as an HPA, I could just put that clicker into the gearbox, install my trigger, and then just feel it out. It's way easier to do those adjustments to your trigger when it's just an HPA system instead of relying on everything being an AEG. One of the questions that you guys might have is what is the expected longevity of these clicker systems? Being as they are printed, they are technically made of a weaker material. However, they do need to be printed, specifically because of the incorporation with the magnets. There cannot be any additional components that can be magnetized. Otherwise, that's going to interfere with either the hybrid system or the trigger board itself and how it recognizes where the shot is. It also, one, is going to cut down on the overall cost, so it's going to be way more accessible for a lot of people to incorporate these into these builds. It's also super easy that if potentially you do mess something up, it's very easy to get your hands onto another one. And in the case of if you mess something up, more than likely you won't. In conversation with Perun, they have assured me that some of these clicker systems have gone hundreds of thousands of clicks and do not show any sign of breaking anytime soon. A lot of times people that will utilize micro switches, specifically some of the Aries model of ones, if you recognize the sound of this click system right here, which sounds a lot like an Aries micro switch. But because it is magnetic, it can last significantly longer compared to a more traditional electronic micro switch, which is phenomenal. On this V2 Clicker Pro, I am currently at around 14,000 clicks. I've got my little counter system on the very side here, and have had no issues whatsoever. So that has been phenomenal to do my little bit of testing and have that conversation with Perun. You guys might also have questions about the MOSFET or potentially the trigger boards. When you take these two milsims and you want to incorporate them into your milsim builds, how are they going to work and how they operate when it comes to those inclement weather patterns? The hybrid as well as the trigger board are going to have a water resistant coating, like a lot of other MOSFETs or electronic boards that are in the airsoft industry right now. They are going to be better built and better designed for that inclement weather specifically. There are going to be clips of players that are running the Perun MOSFETs in rainy conditions. That is something that I do want to do a much more thorough test on when we are going to talk about the trigger board specifically, because I have a feeling some of these builds, when it comes to MSW, might be caught in the rain by accident or intentionally. So how reliable are these electronics going to be when they are met with downpour and rain, right? So that's something I'm really excited to get further into, but I've been assured they can handle some light rain, some sprinkling, and we have a couple of clips to show you guys as well. And if you are looking to get these clickers for your airsoft replica, visit the link down below to go to our website in order to pick either the Speeder Clicker V3 or the V2 Pro and add them to your airsoft replica in combination with the hybrid that we currently have available, or the HPA trigger board, which is going to be soon releasing. And we're really excited to be doing some additional testing on that in particular. And again, stay tuned for that video coming out shortly. If you guys do have any further questions, put them down in the comment section below. Hit us up on our social medias, contact us via emails. You can probably get me on customer service. So without further ado, we're gonna get out of here. So you guys take care, stay safe, stay positive, and I'll see you in the next one.